So I want to talk about the coronavirus and everything that's going on out there, but there's specifically one side of this issue I want to talk about. I don't really want to talk about whether it's serious, whether it's not serious, whether it's a bioweapon or whether it's legitimate. But the main thing I want to talk about and ask you all is, how far are you willing to go to let this virus control you? And the reason I ask this question is because all over the world right now, I'm watching as governments are starting to take a lot of authority, a lot of control in order to combat what's going on, in order to make people seem safe, to give them the illusion that they're safe. They're willing to suspend people's civil rights. They're willing to suspend, in the U.S., suspend their constitution. In Canada, we're prepared to do the same thing. So my question to you is, how far are you prepared to go to fight the coronavirus, and how much power are you willing to give up to the federal government in order to do so? There is a old Ben Franklin line. Whether it's true or not, it is irrelevant, but what he says in it, I find, is very powerful. And this line that was spoken apparently by Benjamin Franklin is, those who would cede liberty for security deserve neither. So saying that the idea of freedom and liberty is everything, and that if you're prepared to trade that in for security, that you don't deserve it because you don't understand what you're giving up. You're not truly giving up your liberty for security. You're giving up your liberty for control. And how many of you trust to give over this authority to the federal government and then trust them to give that power up once this whole thing is said and done? Because sooner or later, the coronavirus is going to be done. It's no longer going to be a threat. We're still going to be here, and then we're going to have seceded all of this control over to the Trudeau government, which I know nobody watching me trusts. I know you don't trust them. Many of you don't trust the government regardless of who's in power, who has the authority. So this is why I ask this of you. Because as I look to what's going on in Italy, to what is going on in the United States, to what's going on here, I see this authority being handed over to them. So for instance, in the U.S., right now, in many different states, New York just recently is starting to do this, starting sometime this week. But they are going to be, in New York, they're no longer going to allow people to leave their homes, which is an infringement on the First Amendment, because the amendment gives them the right to peacefully assemble. Now, this is also happening when they're saying that people can no longer congregate in large groups, either on private or public property. I believe that in many states, it's no more than 50 people in public or in private that you can gather with, which again is an infringement on it. Certain states are now not allowing you to purchase firearms as all this is going on. So that's an infringement on the Second Amendment. So we're seeing how this is playing out. In Italy, they have very strict rules in place right now as to what you can do, when you can go out, and what you can go out for. And if you violate these rules, you can face upwards of a year in jail. So this is why I'm asking this. And here in Canada, the most recent thing for us is just a couple days ago, we had Justin Trudeau give a speech before the Canadian people, in which, of course, he lied. He said that they were doing everything in their power since the very beginning of this crisis in order to protect us and their families. But the point is that we've known about this, what was going on, going back as far as December. In fact, in many different countries, it was the people that had to speak up and ask their government, is the coronavirus something we should be worried about? Because we're seeing what's taking place over in China. So they did nothing. They allowed it to come here. They called people racist. How dare you want to, keep Chinese people out? How dare you call it the Wuhan virus or the Chinese virus, the Wu flu? all this. And then now, just the other day, they came out and said things like they're closing down the Canadian border. Anybody who's non-Canadian, who's not a Canadian or not a permanent resident, is no longer to enter the country. This is something they should have done a long time ago. But they allowed this to happen. And now they're starting to talk about whether they should institute a new Emergency Measures Act. This is being considered by the Trudeau government. Now, the Emergency Measures Act, more specifically, is the War Measures Act, which was what was implemented by none other than Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, back in 1978, I believe it was, during the whole FLQ situation that was going on in Quebec. So it suspended a lot of your civil liberties. For instance, one thing that it ends up doing is the fact that it suspends the part of our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms that allow you certain things, such as to not be held without due process, to have the right to an attorney present, to have a right to a speedy trial, to be released if you're not charged with a crime. These are the sort of things that the War Measures Act, or the Emergency Measures Act, actually protected you under. Now, yesterday, Press for Truth, Dan Dix, ended up releasing a video where he also brought up the Quarantine Act that came into effect in 2005 and was put in place because of the SARS outbreak that we had back in the early 2000s. And the thing is about this is that this would give the federal government, it would allow them to quarantine someone against their will. It would allow, probably one of the most damning things about it too, excluding that part, had to be with they can pretty much dictate any piece of property, public or private, as a quarantine zone, so they can take it for their own authority against your will. And this is the sort of thing that we're threatened with what's going on right now. Yeah, here it is, right here. So here we got the Quarantine Act. And then if we go down to Section 6, Quarantine Station. The minister may establish a quarantine station at any place in Canada. So this is a threat that it's putting us under. Now the thing is too, is with everything that's going on, with everything that I'm seeing playing out, I can't help but feel that this is not actually as big a threat as the government wants to present it to be, but they're actually using it. There we go. They're actually using it as a means to test us, see how far they can take something, how far they can challenge our rights and our freedoms. How far are we willing to accept a totalitarian martial law government without putting up a fight against it? It's also preparing people for a future that has been planned and in the works for some time. But as I'm seeing this play out, I'm seeing certain things, such as right now, there are many restaurants that you can't go into. But what's interesting right now is that because of the coronavirus, one thing that a lot of these businesses have done has suspended the use of money. Now you can use your debit card, you can use your credit card, no problem. Mainly for the tap. And that way the people working behind the counter don't actually have to touch the money, just in case it happened to come in contact with someone with coronavirus, something like that. But I want you to remember, since most of these people watching this are going to have watched my old videos too, do you remember the video that I put out not that long ago, where I was talking about a one world currency, where the whole point, and this was months ago, the Bank of Canada, the governor of the Bank of Canada, ended up admitting that they're trying to move towards a digital currency, where you would not have physical money. Everything would be available to you in all digital form. This is what I feel they're preparing us for. The people who have freaked out and are going out, preparing themselves, this has caused a lack of shortage in food and supplies and is keeping us submissive to the government right now. The government just announced today there's about $82 billion that they're going to be putting aside in order to help Canadians out in this situation. But this is, to me, is preparing us for a lack of resources in the future, which will be deliberate and manipulated for this exact reason, because it keeps us relying on the government. When you're relying on the government, you're less likely to protest. You're less likely to put up a fight against them because you're relying on what they're giving you. And if they cut that off, then you're in danger of starving, of going broke, of becoming homeless, of dying. And this is what I think they're preparing us for with everything that's going on. This has been one large test by governments all around the world in order to see how far they can push the envelope right now. And this is why this is what worries me, because, and this is not just me, this is a lot of other people. One of the main concerns that I've seen people since I've been talking to people right now is, how are they going to afford everything? Because as businesses close, they're not working. Many people are paid by the hour. So if they're not working, if the business is not open, they have no way of making money, which means that many of them are trying to move to employment insurance, welfare. Now, the thing is that these people are actually losing money because EI is not going to pay them their full amount. They're not going to pay them their salary that they got for 40 hours a week of work. So this is one of the main things that is affecting people. The shortage of resources, and it's another big one. Those are probably the two biggest ones right now, unless it's somebody who's in the demographic where they would be affected by the coronavirus, like the elderly. Most people are not concerned with the coronavirus itself, but they're concerned about what's taking place because of the coronavirus. And this is what I think is really coming out of this whole situation. A preparation for a world that you're not going to like, but we've already seen as everybody's willing to hand over that authority. And when you've handed over this power, we've set a precedent, because the precedent was set once by Pierre Elliott Trudeau back in 1978, or when, I don't remember the exact year, but I'm pretty sure it's 78, with the FLQ crisis, where he put the War Measures Act into place, and we had soldiers on the streets of Quebec and other streets inside of Canada, and all of our rights were suspended because of this. Now we're having the possibility of this happening again, which means that we have two precedents being set. And the problem is, it's going to become less severe every single time it plays out. Less severe, but they're going to implement the Emergency Measures Act. They're going to institute the Quarantine Act. Maybe next time it's because there's a mass protest against the government, and then they say, well, this is a threat to us, we're implementing the Emergency Measures Act. And this is something else. There were protests going on all over the world against various different governments. Those have suddenly stopped. Suddenly, Hong Kong is deserted, and their people are not protesting and fighting back against the Chinese government. Suddenly, the Yellow Vest protesters are not fighting back against the French government, even though they went on for some 70 weeks, give or take, straight. 70 weekends straight, where they were protesting against the government of Macron. Despite all this, suddenly they disappeared. All of these have gone away. So this is what I think is the bigger danger of setting this precedent. And on top, that's why I ask you, how much are you willing to give? How much of your freedoms, how much of your rights are you prepared to give up to fight this coronavirus? It just reminds me of a line by the comedian George Carlin, where he ended up saying, everyone thinks they have a bunch of inalienable rights. You don't. You have a list of temporary privileges that are given to you by the government, and just go ask the people, the Japanese Americans in World War II about their rights. Good, honest, hardworking Americans that were imprisoned against their will for unconstitutionally, for no just cause, and when they needed their rights the most, it was taken away from them. And this is going to be something similar. The government has no problem trampling on our rights. Where's the Supreme Court justice talking about everything that's going on? They're nowhere. Do you see the police and the military standing up against the government for implementing stuff that is against our rights? No, you don't. And the worst part of this is the War Measures Act gives the government a legal ability to suspend our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which means that it is not inalienable. They can be taken away from you by any minute. And just look at something like the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act was signed in the U.S. in 2001, just after the 9/11 attacks, and it gave widespread powers to the CIA, to the FBI, to the NSA, to the Pentagon, to the U.S. military, to the U.S. government, all these different branches of the U.S. military and government. Things such as being able to, unconstitutional stuff, like being able to imprison someone indefinitely if they were suspected of a terrorist act, as well as allowing these government officials to commit extensive negotiation, enhanced negotiation, which in a lot of situations means torture. Things such as waterboarding, etc., etc. That was signed just after 2001, when everyone was scared. 3,000 lives lost on one specific day. The worst terrorist attack ever to take place on U.S. soil. And it's still in effect today. This kept getting renewed over and over and over and over again. That the Patriot Act is still in effect in America almost 20 years after the fact. 20 years after 9/11. So that power was not given back to the government. That power continues on and on and on and on. And as far as I can tell, there's only been one man, one politician that has ever stood up trying to stop the Patriot Act, and that was Rand Paul, putting aside his father. I'm talking more recently. But I remember seeing the video clips of Rand Paul actually trying to filibuster it, stop the Patriot Act from being signed on yet again. It didn't work. So if you're prepared to give this amount of power, this amount of authority to the government to let them push you around like this, then when does it stop? When will they hand that power back? And that's the question you gotta ask yourself. When I ask, how far are you prepared to go? How much are you willing to give up to allow the government to fight the coronavirus? Thank you all for tuning in. I'm Adrian Lloyd. This is just my stupid opinion. I'm sorry I've been off for so long. I took a couple weeks off after whichever was my last video, and then I got into deep diving into a subject, and I'm making a video about it, so I haven't just been not doing anything, but I have been working on something. I brought up a man before, John Seeley. People will probably remember him from my video. I talked about the pedophiles that surround Justin Trudeau. And I'm not focusing on the pedophile aspect of John Seeley, but what I'm focusing on is a project he took part in, which was known as the Forest Hill Village Project. I'm talking about what they were trying. It took place just after World War II. Talking about what they were trying to do, who was involved with the project, the outcomes of that project, and it's quite interesting. It's required a lot of reading. I had to go through a thesis that was written about John Seeley. That was close to 400 pages, so it's taken me a while to get all the work done. I'm hoping to have it up in about a week. I'm hoping. I got a bit of a busy week ahead of me. I'm still working at the moment, so things have picked up. Some people are not at work right now, so I'll hope to get it out within a week. Might be a little bit longer, but another video coming up soon. Thank you all for tuning in, and I'll talk to you all soon.